So my name is Dolev Melamed. I am with Comp Health. I'll quickly introduce who we are, and then we can get started with a very exciting and pretty jam-packed program for today. So Comp Health helps healthcare startups at various stages as they enter the US market. We support them with primary and secondary market research, product development, value proposition refinement, business development, sales enablement, KOL recruitment, pilots, and really anything that they need, all while bridging the cultural and language gaps that they inevitably run into. Most importantly, we give startups access to payer and provider decision makers. Our team, including Dr. Jonathan Ringo, who's the former president of Sinai Hospital in Maryland and one of our panelists for today. He has extensive experience in the US healthcare industry, resulting in a large network of relationships that we're able to leverage. We encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn for insights and for updates about past and future webinars. And we're really excited to be here today as part of this event, along with Imagine Bio and Matter and several other organizations, both in the US and in Israel. So thank you to Avi and Ilya and everybody for putting this together. This should really be a great opportunity to learn about the opportunities for building and scaling health tech with healthcare providers and payers in the US. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen and we can get started.
Thanks so much, Dolev. I am looking forward to this program and happy to be kicking off the first conversation of it. I'll give you 2 minutes of background on Matter and then segue into the conversation. So I'm Stephen Collins. I'm the CEO of Matter, and we are a healthcare incubator and innovation hub, really built on a belief that collaboration between entrepreneurs and industry leaders is the best way to develop healthcare solutions. We do 3 things in service of our mission. First is we incubate startups. Since we launched 6 years ago, we've worked with more than 500 companies ranging from very early stage to really growth stage businesses. And we have a suite of services to help them advance at every stage along their journey. The second is we're a nexus for people who are just passionate about healthcare innovation. We produce a lot of programs, including large-scale events for the broader community, as well as small forums that are exclusively tailored to our members and partners. And then the third thing is we work with large organizations like health systems and life sciences companies and payers to help them achieve their innovation goals. We've worked with more than 130 companies since we launched, helping them source and co-develop solutions and think through complex challenges. And then we also have some training capabilities to help them innovate better. Israel for us, so we're based in Chicago. Israel for us is a particularly interesting community because there are so many incredible entrepreneurs building solutions, specifically with an eye on the US market. We've had about a dozen member companies, startups from Israel, and we hope to work with many, many more in the coming months and years. We've also brought a number of groups to visit Israel over the last several years, not in 2020 and probably not in 21, but hopefully sometime soon. And we've hosted groups at our headquarters. And we also have an ongoing partnership with Sheba Medical Center. One of our partners, since we launched in 2015, has been Osf Healthcare, which is about a $3 billion system based in Illinois with 14 hospitals and about 150 sites of care in total. And of all of the dozens of systems that we've either had formal partnerships with or that we've gotten to know over the years, OSF is one of the most innovative, with a desire to innovate. This has always appeared to me to be kind of baked into their core DNA. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Becky Buchan, who is the Senior Vice President of Innovation. She leads their innovation team within the organization, developing the processes and the internal infrastructure, and ensuring that their innovation efforts, which includes collaborations with startups, achieves real results. So Becky, I'm very happy that you are here and for this conversation. And for as long as I've been familiar with OSF, as long as I've known you, that the organization seems to really have a core belief that there are startups out there in the world building solutions that have the potential to improve the health and well-being of your patients. And the way that you've internalized that is therefore imperative that you figure out ways of working with them. So it has certainly seemed from an external point of view that there's very clearly a high level alignment within to OSF's mission of providing the best care. But often it's easier to talk about wanting to partner with entrepreneurs than actually making it happen. So let's talk a little bit about the business models that really work in these contexts, specifically with you. And oftentimes we see entrepreneurs who have these incredible technologies and they can do a lot of things, but they don't necessarily know how to shape a viable business out of it. So when you see a startup whose solution you're interested in, where you think it can improve the health and of your patient population, how do you go into it thinking? How do you think about the business model?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here and provide some of what I would call kind of our lessons learned or learnings along the way. We start, I would say, really understanding, first of all, the strategic fit, right? Is there going to be strategic value that a given solution or company is going to help drive or transform healthcare? And we've set that vision for our health system. It is about transforming healthcare. We have innovation as a pillar. So we really start there. Is there a strategic fit? The second criteria I think that we start to look at is, does it solve a big enough problem? Like there are some really great things and really great solutions, but does it solve a big enough problem to really start the transformation of healthcare? Or is it just a nice to have, right? We've got to make those critical decisions as we're looking at business models. The next thing then that we start to look at, and I'm sure all of you are all too familiar with, are the reimbursement models, or some of what I would call the reimbursement constraints that healthcare is operating in, right? So what pivot would have to occur, or what connection would we have to have with the payer as we consider reimbursement for a given solution? Also understanding, especially for OSF, like we serve across the state, but we're serving in both urban areas as well as rural areas. So how does that solution, I'll say, play differently from an urban perspective or large dense population versus rural? Really something to think about. But as it relates also specifically to the business model is understanding how is it going to integrate within workflows. That is critical. We tried in the beginning to say, well, we're going to do some small tests. We're not going to integrate solutions because we just want to test them. We quickly learned that doesn't work. You have to know what it's going to, I'll say what the solution is going to behave like once it's integrated within a workflow. I think it's also important, some of the lessons learned from a business model perspective, you can go in with a small pilot. And as you mentioned, from an OSF perspective, we have 14 acute care hospitals. So we can go in with a pilot of a solution within one hospital. But what does it look like when we scale, right? So if you're going in on a per bed business model or a per employee business model, what is it going to look like at scale? Is there really the benefit or the value based on the cost, not only to pilot, but to scale? So those are several of the things that we really look at as it relates to the business model and working with the startups so that they're considering those things.
And I'll also say you don't just work. I want to come back to some of that, but you don't just work with startups as a customer necessarily. You've got there's a venture fund. You'll co-develop solutions. We've had members of Matter that have really worked with OSF in a variety of different capacities. We've had one that you really co-developed the solution together. We've multiple times you've made investments, sometimes very early, sometimes even later. And so how do you decide, so say you've got a company, you've got good strategic fit, you feel like eventually it could, work in a rural and an urban setting. It's solving a big problem. You feel like there are potentially good integration components, and there's an investment pathway, there's a co-development pathway, there's a, hey, we want to be a customer pathway. How do you decide which path to put a company on?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that isn't, I'll say, really easy to answer. The one thing that I guess I would mention is that when we start working with a startup, we assess, is it a cultural fit for us, right? So do our, like, what we want to achieve. So I mentioned strategic fit, but like, what is the relationship as we start to build that with the startup? So that would be kind of one element that then we would decide, could we go down a co-development path with this? Or maybe they're too, I'll say, mature. They have their, solution really built. They've scaled other places. We probably would make a decision not to go down, I'll say, kind of the co-development path. So it oftentimes really depends. I will tell you also what we've learned as it relates to the path that we go down. Initially, when we really, about 5 years ago, really established innovation as a goal, the ecosystem, as you mentioned, ventures, piloting solutions, scaling solutions, we started entering into what I would call longer-term contracts, 3-year contracts. But what we quickly found is that really wasn't the best. It wasn't the best for the startup. While that seems really intriguing, oh, I have this 3-year contract, we didn't necessarily always have aligned goals and path forward when we signed those longer term contracts. What we're doing now is really saying, okay, let's do some piloting, investigating over the next 90 days. Let's get aligned over or around our goals and objectives, run some small pilots, get hopefully the right outcomes and alignment, understanding if it's a cultural fit, and then we determine like what path we would go down longer term. Could it be a co-development path? Is it, to your point, I'll say maybe just a customer path? So that's some of what we've learned over time. It's not always a benefit to enter, at least out of the gate, into a longer term contract.
So it sounds like so it sounds like there isn't necessarily a science behind whether you go down a co-development route or you go down this. It sounds, if I can put some words in your mouth, maybe, it's like as you get to know these companies and as you get to know them from both what they can do, but also who they are and kind of the cultural fit, you kind of decide how close you want that relationship to look.
Yes, and what I would also add to that, again, as we've learned, part of our ecosystem is about bringing forward clinical subject matter experts and really getting exposure with the startup, how to engage with the startup, but then also that clinical expertise that so they may be giving advice, this is a great solution, but it would be really great if we could do this. And then working with those, that's where then you start to see, oh, this is a co-development opportunity. We have algorithms that would benefit both OSF, if we built them together collectively, that would benefit both OSF as well as the startup.
Got it. All right, so on a kind of a more tactical point of view for the entrepreneurs who are listening in and wondering, what is more attractive to you? Again, you've got strategic fit and rural and urban, and let's say culturally, it's a dream fits and everything. We see companies all the time that come in and they say, we can help you reduce expenses. And then there's companies that come in and we say, we can help you boost your top line. Which of those is there one of those models or one of those sides of that equation that's more appealing to you in general? And in either case, how do you convince yourselves, how do you prove to yourselves that the company will actually produce the kind of economic returns that you need in order to justify the investment, not necessarily capital investment, but the investment in the in the relationship in the business and that you're hoping for?
Yeah, so really to answer the question, we like to see a mix within our portfolio. Again, to your point, kind of reducing cost, boosting, as well as boosting kind of top line revenue, if you will. I would say one of like specific to OSF, and I think it's really across the industry, certainly coming out of COVID, the radical efficiency seems to be taking, I'll say, top priority. But that doesn't necessarily mean, again, we like a balance within the portfolio. But I guess I would also take us back a little bit to, from a healthcare perspective, the quadruple aim, right? So thinking about, making sure it's about cost, quality, satisfaction of our providers, and satisfaction of our employees or our clinicians. And really the reason I say that, if you look in depth at the reimbursement models across, whether you've got risk-based contracts or, fee-for-service contracts, it still does ultimately come back to that quadruple aim and making sure that we're able to drive value as it relates to those four components.
Got it. And interesting that, just to come back to one point, it sounds like post-COVID, well, since the onset of COVID, there's I hope we get to post-COVID, but at least in the last 12 months, there's been a maybe a somewhat of a shift or a prioritization more towards where efficiency becomes even more compelling, looking at that balance of top line versus bottom line.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Stephen, is what we're really seeing. I mean, you can go down the path of traditional cost reduction. Really, to move the needle, it needs to be radical, right? Or like what we're calling radical efficiency, in order to get kind of that next, I'll say, jump on cost of care. Got it.
All right, my last question for you, because we're running up on time, is how do you feel about risk-sharing business models? If you worked with startups where you're either not paying them up front or you're paying them something minimal, but there's shared upside.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily, we certainly want to continue to go down that path. We do have one recent example, and I think we will see more of this. I kind of mentioned some of the shorter term contracts up front, and that short term could look like 90 days. But also what we've started to do is have discussions as part of that contracting process, actually starting on the venture side. Are there any shared goals that we could outline as warrants as it relates to, again, shared goals, shared outcomes if we do that? So we have one example, again, that we're kind of exploring, that, there was a risk score as part of the solution that they didn't have, but they wanted, right? Because they knew the market would support that. And they could work with our clinicians to develop that risk score. So we established that as a warrant up front, again, on the venture side. And I think we will see more of that, because it really did align us around goals and timelines.
Well, I would love to ask you more questions about that, as well as all sorts of things that you said, but we're out of time. So I will just say thank you so much for your insights. One of the things I do like about this event that we've worked together with Imagine Bio on is that while I wish I could ask you 15 more questions, it moves quickly through and through a bunch of different topics. So thank you so much. And I'm now going to introduce Ilya Budik, who is the founder and managing partner of Imagine Bio. His firm works with life sciences companies on their Israel strategy, and it's been really a pleasure for us at Batter to work with him and his team on this event. We worked together on one about a month ago, and has been really great getting to know him and his team and working together on this. So he's going to introduce and moderate the next panel discussion. So Ilya, back off to you.
Thank you so much, Stephen and Becky. That was very insightful. And indeed, it's been a pleasure working with you and your team. Amazing team you guys have over there. Thank you, Gina and Casey, for all the help, as well as bringing in Comp Health, Dolev and Avi and Dr. Ringo for this event as well. So just to give a quick background on Imagine Bio, and then we'll bring on the panel. So we're really fortunate to have the opportunity to work both with startups on their biz dev and strategic build up as well, and on the corporate side, both on the pharma and healthcare providers, et cetera, superficially helping them scout out the Israeli ecosystem by really focusing on helping build up business models and implementation of scaling what this event is all about, which is building and scaling up collaborations. So with that said, if we can bring on Plamen Petrov and Pablo and Jonathan Thierman and Jonathan Ringo, very excited to get the panel started. The whole idea of this event is continuing from last month on the topic of best practices for building and scaling up collaborations. So I'm really excited to have on the panelists for today who have tremendous experience across the spectrum of the healthcare provider and payer sector on what it means to actually, practically speaking, maneuver their large organizations to successfully collaborate with younger, emerging, innovative startups and vendors. So without further ado, the way we're going to do it tonight is, as many of you heard last time, we presented a report on the collaborations in digital health in Israel and the global healthcare ecosystem. We'll post up a link if anybody missed that. You can watch that one on YouTube or download the report. But one of the key things there was there are so many common hurdles that we all face. And so what I wanted to ask the panelists tonight is their own best practices on how to address those. So maybe we'll start off with Plamen from Anthem, who is the VP of Exponential Technology, sitting currently in Chicago, but has really been a part of Anthem's drive over the last 2 years as the first major US payer to build up an R&D office here in Israel, which we're super fortunate to have him and his whole team on board. And he's really been a core part of their work, not just with startups on the US side, but also on several on the Israeli side. So Plamen, maybe you can give some background on yourself and tell me what are some of the unique things that Anthem's doing to address these hurdles?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure. I wish I was able to do it in person in Tel Aviv, but hey, we'll get back traveling in a few weeks or months, or we'll see. Plamen Petrov, quick intro, part of Anthem. For people that do not know, Anthem is one of the leading health benefits company in the United States. All in all, we service about 105, 106 million people. Out of them, 42 million are covered by our family of health plans, Fortune 30 company. It has been an amazing experience. I've been at Anthem for about 2.5 years and exclusively focused on bringing new technology, exponential capability into our digital care delivery area. And a lot of that was in partnership with startups, including from Israel. And some of the, you mentioned hurdles. It's an amazing experience to try to combine two cultures of a large enterprise, highly matrixed, with like, as I mentioned, triple-digit billion in revenue, with a small startup that moves super fast. There's no matrixing. I mean, basically, you have a goal and you work on that, and you try to mix those two cultures and be successful. So I would say figuring that one out is probably one of the biggest challenges and success criteria.
What about on the business model side? You know, Anthem has their business. You guys are doing an amazing job when it comes for managing and taking care of the insurance and claims side and providing that side of care for so many Americans. But on the business model, when you work with a digital health startup, you know, what does that mean? What are some of the ways that a startup can approach you and say, hey, we've got a meaningful proposition for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the business model cannot be a traditional, it's hard for it to be a traditional vendor model. since the startup probably most likely does not have a track record. So by usually the procurement team will put a stop saying, hey, who are these guys? We can really rely on them to bring the quality. So the model has to be beyond vendor. You need to figure out how to do a piloting, so you can pick the select people that you can work with, and there's high likelihood of there is some likelihood of success. But then after that, you have to really trust that partner and set up a pilot, and then build a model under which both parties have a skin in the game. And you have to also, I mean, in our case, we did put some investments in our partners. So we want them to be successful. And so it's a combination of like capital investment in the company, paired with actual revenue from capabilities that they're bringing to Anthem. So from a business model, we have to work with both sides of the organization, both with the line of business, operating budgets. There's a particular problem we're solving, but also reach out to our M&A or on our investment corporate investment team, so that we can pair that and fill in any gaps. So you have to really be creative. And I think Becky mentioned that having pilots is a key thing to get started. This is key. In many cases, some of the startups may not have sufficient clinical pilots proving how they work in healthcare. So we have to invest in a clinical trial with them potentially before adjusting our policy for reimbursements and so forth. So from a business model, I would say being creative, including investment as part of the mix, figuring out the balance between a operating budget from a project to a strategic investment. In our case, we also have, I'm part of the digital organization at Anthem. We're chartered with transforming Anthem into a digital first organization. So that also played part into our investment. All of that has to be part of the mix. So cannot be just a vendor management.
Very cool. Would any of the other panelists want to weigh in on business models before we move on to the next one? Okay, cool. So I'm gonna move over to you, Dr. Herskovy. Pablo, very excited to have you on board. Pablo serves as the Intensive Care Consortium Regional Medical Director, which I think is a long way of saying that he is managing 8 hospitals' ICUs, which is probably an amazing thing in any time, but certainly over the last year. And HCA, for those who you on the call don't know, is the largest for-profit hospital operator in the US with over 180 hospitals. And to put that in perspective, it's about 4 times bigger than the next biggest one. So a very unique structure and a very amazing structure. So Pablo, very much thank you for coming on board. I wanted to ask you, when it comes to working with such a large organization like HCA, how do you integrate with that? There's so many different stakeholders. Everybody, knows how to be really good and focused at their job. How do you align with people who have their day jobs to look at a new technology, a new vendor, a new startup that even you as a champion say, hey, this could be a really meaningful addition to the team?
Great. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me. And it's really a pleasure. A little bit on, just want to give you a little bit of background on what we do on the critical care end, because the ICC consortium, which is the ICU leg of HCA, not only do we staff ICUs, but we're pretty much in charge of protocolizing ICUs for the entire enterprise, serving as subject matter experts. We're not in every ICU for the company. We're in 46 ICUs out of the 188 hospitals they have. So we serve as subject matter experts in terms of ICU organization and processes, even in the units when where we're not present. And we, of course, are in charge of managing quality outcomes, utilization, efficiency metrics in the different hospitals where we operate. Now, you brought up, I think the question is key, particularly this year, right, in which ICUs have been front and center, and things have been so dynamic and ever changing that we've lived in a state of exception, and integrating processes both at the bedside, where coordination of care is key, and at a big picture level in terms of allocation of resources, staffing models, how do we utilize technology or partnerships that HCA has available in order to meet the needs, and really do it in the flip of a switch, because this is what was required this year.
Can you walk me through a case study? I don't know if you can mention a name or not, but maybe something that you guys have done and how that actually worked out.
Great. So clear examples. So we serve in 46 ICUs of the 188 programs that HCA has. So a lot of those that we don't serve in are smaller ICUs with no intensivist program, no ICU providers on site. They're really not well protocolized, that don't have as much of a structure as others do, many of which are rural communities. And all of a sudden, these hospitals were burdened with a number of patients they were never prepared to see. And we had to literally within a week start building solutions for them using staffing that was scarce, protocols that were present, but these hospitals had never used, and leveraging the technology that we have. And granted, working in a big hospital organization, innovation is challenging because it involves many layers. It involves integration of workflows that are different depending on the hospital you're working in. And one of the solutions we started to develop by need was starting telehealth solutions for ICUs. There's nothing new. I mean, telehealth has been present in ICU for quite some time. The problem is it's never been scaled to the extent that we needed it.
Sure.
And so what we started finding was physicians anywhere in the country that we could cross-license for any state who were able to absorb and manage 3, 4, 5 ICUs of different varieties, do multidisciplinary rounds in place there, and communicate with the entire care team, and being able to develop transfer strategies within facilities, in real time and cover those 24/7s. Granted, it was challenging. I mean, I can talk for 2 hours about the hurdles that we encountered. By no means was it perfect, but I think we had a lot of lessons learned. We used, I can talk about the vendor we used. We used InTouch as a telemedicine platform, and virtually we had their representatives come and train us, and come and train the nurses, and train the ER physicians within 48 hours. When we didn't have those platforms available, we used their platforms and iPads to do FaceTime. And honestly, I think we've learned a lot from our mistakes and a lot from the good things that came out of that. And now we're in the process of trying to scale that platform to really meet the needs of different hospitals that, COVID or not COVID, HCA has identified as being able to benefit from that.
So that's really interesting. So we could definitely go on about so much of this and many other topics. So hopefully we can continue some of that in the breakout room at the end. Maybe we can compare and contrast the HCA scale with LifeBridge, with Dr. Jonathan Thierman. So LifeBridge, for those who aren't familiar, operates 4 hospitals and medical centers in the Maryland area, as well as a long-term nursing facility there. And Dr. Thierman serves as the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Medical Information Officer. Jonathan, could you give us some background on what LifeBridge is doing when it comes to innovation? And I know you're really involved on the IT integration side and aligning some of your internal stakeholders. Can you compare and contrast what we've heard from the HCA side to how it's done on your end, and how you've actually moved quite a bit of collaborations both in Israel and beyond forward inside your hospital?
Sure, happy to, and thanks for including me on the panel. So just a little bit of background on LifeBridge. So we're now a 5 hospital system. We recently acquired a 5th. We cover the gamut really from an ambulance company and over 100 primary care offices in the Baltimore communities through to the 5 hospital system and then to a few nursing homes and post-acute care, as well as we have a commercial division which has a 35 urgent care center chain and does home care and other services like that. So we serve the Baltimore, Maryland area. We're the 3rd largest Baltimore or Maryland system behind Hopkins University of Maryland. And I think the unique void we fill is the small but agile system that's really focused on innovation and change. So thanks in large part to Dr. Ringo, who was with LifeBridge before, we've built up quite a innovation department. We have a bioincubator with about 15 companies and residents that we help nurture, and we have relationships with our major payer, Care First, and we do collaborations and fund joint ventures with them. So I guess I wear a few different hats, but the primary hat as the Chief Medical Information Officer has a lot to do with evaluating relationships and partners for innovation, and looking at how they can integrate with our EMR and how they can be useful to our clinicians and really part of the workflow without causing too much disruption. I also am the clinical director of our virtual hospital, which is our telehealth organization, and we can talk about it, but essentially we went from what we thought was a very successful 18,000 visits a year to now we're at 140,000 and counting because of COVID telemedicine visits. Yeah, so it's been a busy year, and we've been growing a lot, because of COVID, essentially, in that respect.
Wow. And so when it comes to, maybe if you can look at a specific case study, what did it mean to integrate a new vendor or a new startup into a pilot and actually scale that up? How did you align some of the folks that you needed to make that happen?
Sure. I mean, in the case of, with COVID, essentially, we were fortunate to have a lot of existing technologies that we've been working with, both in terms of telehealth platform, as well as some, just using some standard things like Teams and Smartsheets very extensively. And we've really leveraged a lot of tools that we had in place to grow quickly. And, integration is a funny thing. It means different things to different people. And, we talked to dozens and dozens of vendors that tell us they're integrated with Cerner, and the extent to which they're integrated is variable. And what I used to, as a CMIO, what I used to care about and what I care about now in growing all these operations to serve the COVID need are completely different, to be honest with you. So so integration, traditionally, I was looking for things with seamless experiences for the providers, single sign-on and authentication, single source of truth for the data, and a real deep integration using maybe the Smart on Fire APIs with our EMR, things like that. But in reality, with COVID, we've relied on systems that were not as well integrated. We've made connections between Smartsheets and Cerner, and we've scripted some protocols that run overnight that help ingest patients into Cerner and things like that. but the ability to be agile has been so important with COVID. So some of our more traditional, larger vendors who are more tightly integrated don't really let us configure and adapt the system as quickly. It's a change request that might take a week or two to come back from a large vendor. And those vendors actually have gone by the wayside when it came to COVID. And we've been using the smaller, more agile systems where we could, within minutes, make changes, that we needed to in order to address the need. So, the irony is that it used to be that these kind of more well-baked in integrations were really important to us. But when it's something like a pandemic and you're trying to make weekly or daily changes, some of the more agile systems that allow us to configure them more readily are actually the ones that we're going with and trying to scale up to serve the needs.
So it sounds like you're a good address for those who are ready to be agile and work together.
Yeah, I mean, that's been really important. And so, the only thing that, we're finding that we're pressing the limitations of some of these smaller systems because they just don't have, they're just not built to handle the volumes, I guess. When we started with a few drive-through testing sites in March, almost a year ago. And then of course we started doing vaccinations in December. And we quickly, we got like 15,000 vaccines from the States. So we vaccinated our willing employees, and then we moved on to try and vaccinate some of the highly at-risk public. And as we got more vaccines, and we quickly got we're up to like 150,000 requests on our little web form, that we built out for the public. So we're really pressing the limits on some of these smaller vendors, and that's been the pain point now. And so we're actually at the point at LifeBridge where we have smart sheets as an example. We have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of rows and sheets, and our smart sheets, we have to do all sorts of crazy manipulations to archive data in smart sheets so that it will run quickly enough to be useful. And so we're at the point where we're starting to figure out, should we invest in something that can scale even bigger, or is COVID hopefully going to start to taper off and we don't need to make those multi-year future investments? So we're at a turning point, hopefully, where we're actually going to stick with what we have because we're hopeful that things clinically get better in the country and in the world. But that's a big decision we have to make soon with a couple of our vendors.
Amazing. So glad that you could join us, and hopefully a lot of the folks here will have a chance to say hi to you afterwards.
Great,
so last but not least, or as we say, Achron Nach Aviv, want to talk with Dr. Ringo. First, say a mazel tov on his recent aliyah. Coming over to Israel in the middle of this storm is a wow. We're fortunate to have you here, and you come with over 15 years of experience working throughout many hospitals, including LifeBridge and Northwell Health. Would love to hear some of your perspective on what we've heard already, and perhaps if you want to comment a little bit on reimbursement. So at the end of the day, every startup needs to pay the bills as well, as do their corporate partners. How do you make that work?
Sure, absolutely. So firstly, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be talking with some really great colleagues here this evening. A little bit of my background, as you mentioned, recently moved to Israel, actually about 5 months ago, partially to launch a startup. So I could kind of sit on both sides of the aisle here as we talk through it. But for this evening's discussion, really want to focus on some of the things that I've seen over the last few years that can hopefully help some of the attendees this evening as they grow and scale their own businesses. I think that understanding both the macroeconomic environment in which your customer or your partner sits, as well as the micro, is critically important to success for a startup company. The US healthcare system is incredibly complex, and when as a provider or a payer you're sitting with a startup and contemplating doing business with them, having a comfort level that they understand what your incentives are, what's important for you from a financial and quality perspective, is critical to moving forward. Not only understanding the difference between a government payer, a commercial payer, what the current metrics are that are used for reimbursement, but also understanding on a smaller level your ability to get reimbursed for going on this pilot, because healthcare is an incredibly complex business, and you have to pay the bills. And it also means that once you've identified a potential internal customer or a partner in an organization, understanding what their incentives are, what drives them, how they're being measured, and how you can help them succeed. Because success means having an internal cheerleader or an advocate in an organization to help move it through. The other panelists have mentioned, all of us come from very complex organizations, and being able to work through those organizations, being able to have success so that it's not just a pilot that dies, but it's a pilot that scales up, means understanding what your cheerleaders internally need and being able to meet those challenges. So is it pure ROI? Is it quality? Is it regulatory? So, what are the different factors that influence how they evaluate you, how they get evaluated, and what's going to help them sell, being able to participate with you as a startup, as in the pilot or and as a customer.
Very interesting. And as you've moved over to the telehealth side of the business in the last little bit, you got in before telehealth boomed in the last year. What did it mean to figure out a business model and reimbursement for telehealth, and what are you guys doing in that space now?
So it was actually interesting because when we first started, part of the ability was to leverage some of the manpower that exists in Israel, providing telehealth services to the US. And we were able to scale that across not just physicians, but the wide range of mid-levels, social workers, psychologists, pharmacists, the whole clinical care continuum, providing care from Israel to the US. One of the changes that occurred during coronavirus was that many more telemedicine services became reimbursable. However, if you are getting reimbursed by a government payer, you have to be physically present in the US. So we had to move a fair amount of our providers back to the US, or recruit more US-based providers for some of those services. And then again, one of the other challenges in the US in telemedicine is that every state has their own requirements, and others on the panel have mentioned that complexity of having to make sure your providers are licensed not only where they're physically located, but also in the state where the patient is. There's been a lot of discussion in the last few months about making that a more seamless process, and I think we'll be seeing some changes in that area. But it's there's definitely been one of the challenges.
So this panel could easily turn into a full-day workshop, and God willing, maybe by the summer or next year, it will take bets here on the chat when that will be. We can actually have us all together to continue that. So thank you, Plamen and Pablo and Jonathan, Dr. Ringo, for all your comments. And for those of you who want to stick around to the networking at 9:30 Israel time, please do. You'll have a chance to speak with all of them. And so without further ado, we're going to move to hearing really specific case studies. So come down from the high level to the specific. So I want to turn it over to my partner, Dr. Joe Strauss, who's got tremendous experience also on both sides of the aisle here, for our first case study. Joe?
Thank you, Ilya. I much appreciate it, and very happy to be here with this case study with Dr. Michal Gindi of Asuta Medical Centers, and our second Michal Meiri of Agamon Health. I'll do a very quick intro of both, very quick with apologies because we are very short on time. Dr. Gindi, Michal Gindi, is a radiologist with an extensive background in healthcare management as well. She received her medical degree from Ben Gurion University and specialized in radiology with a subspecialty in breast imaging. And as if that wasn't enough, she then earned a master's in public administration from the Kennedy School at Harvard. Dr. Gindi has been at Asuta for the last 6 years. She is the head of imaging, a radiology department, which is doing about 700,000 cases per year and employs 120 physicians, no less. Dr. Gindi, furthermore, conducts research as a faculty member at the Ben Gurion Medical School, is chairperson of the board of Patholab Diagnostics, and importantly for the purposes of our discussion, is also the head of ventures and innovation at Asuta. Our second Michal, Michal Meiri, is the co-founder and CEO at Agamon Healthcare, She holds a BSc in computer science and chemistry, very unusual combination, both from Tel Aviv University, as well as a master's degree in nanotechnology from the University of Cambridge. Professionally, Michal has a strong background in the financial technologies space and is an experienced entrepreneur, having launched successful products at several startups based in London. So that's as far as our august small panel. Let me introduce the topic, and then I'll let both Michal and Michal take it away. Our discussion centers around the fact that Asuta has a huge radiology database, as you might imagine, and at the same time, they had a problem in terms or in concerning the fact that a lot of the data, all their data actually in the database was in natural free text, and therefore they struggled pulling critical data and text data points from that database. So that's Asuta on the one hand and the problem that they had. Came along Michal Meiri with her fintech background and organized Agamon Health around the realization that there's significant underutilization of data in healthcare. And she and her team set out to address that, a part of that problem anyway, by developing a robust natural language processing system. So the respective benefits of a collaboration between Asuta Radiology on the one hand and Agamon on the other hand is becoming, quite clear, I think. And I'd like to ask both Dr. Gindi and Michal Meiri to talk about how they came together, how they found each other, and the origin of their collaboration. Dr. Gindi, maybe you kick it off. I think.
Okay, hi everyone. Nice to be here. Very interesting. I'm already learning a little bit, so it's a lot of fun. I met Michal Meiri who was my predecessor in innovation in Asuta. And, it's all about people. So it didn't take me very long to realize that not only does she have the right name, she's the right person. And we really had a great time learning together. The need for her tool was quite apparent to me because a lot of time when we were trying to help groups that were working on our data, which was one of the goals that I put for myself when I entered this position, part of the problem was to find a ground truth and to be sure that what we think we have is what we have. And the way to go about it was very difficult. There's no, most of our radiologists write in free text. And not only do they do that, they don't even have rules about how they actually summarize what they've seen. So the situation was very difficult. And if you were looking for specific finding in order to find a group of interesting cases, you couldn't really find it. So Michal was really the right person in the right place for me at the beginning when I was just looking for partners in terms of research. And that is how we started. It then became clear to me that we should be able to make more out of it other than just finding cases for joint ventures with other startups or other groups of people, or for ourselves to find specific cases. And we moved into a more robust value proposition that I would let Michal to describe the process. But the beginning was research, pure research.
Thank you. Michal Meiri?
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here, everybody. So I'll just say a few words about Agamon, and I think Dr. Gindi gave the background of how we started. And Asuta, they were our first partner, and I think it was a great opportunity for us first to partner with Dr. Gindi, but also to partner with such an innovative and agile organization with a vast amount of available data. For us, what we're doing today is we really automate workflows that are heavily based on analyzing and using medical textual reports, which is the majority of healthcare data. And the first problem we're solving with this technology that we've built, which is obviously based on NLP technology is the problems of follow-up recommendations. So in the US, about half of patients do not follow up on the radiology recommendations. And that's a huge problem. From the perspective of quality of care, it can result in late diagnosis of cancer, for example, as well as the perspective of litigation issues against clinicians. And finally, it can result in missed revenue opportunity. So we really found a problem that can address these three elements, I would say. And so what we have done is to automatically extract these cases, the findings related to recommendations from those reports, and automate the extraction, the tracking, and management of all these cases, so that we can bring back those patients and be able to close the loop. We also have today collaborations with other large US healthcare organizations, and we built algorithms that are based on now millions of data points that we trained our algorithms on.
Thank you. You mentioned the issue of follow-up, and in our discussions prior to this evening, when we sort of discussed this case study, one of the things that came up was that one of the hurdles that you faced was not necessarily working with the radiologists, but then getting the CRM team, the customer relations management team, to in fact do that follow-up. Maybe you could that's, at least to me, was a bit of an unexpected hurdle, which I think is interesting to spend a minute or two on.
I think it was also for us unexpected in a way, because we assumed that the goal of following up on patients is also relevant to us, although you do need to know the ecosystem. For example, do you contact the patient or do you contact the doctor? What are the rules? What you need to know? Who do you need to say? What can you say? There are lots of logistic issues, but on the whole, when we planned our initial work, we didn't take into account getting them involved. So when we needed them, and we needed them because obviously radiologists are not the ones that are going to be calling all the patients, we needed to sort of re-strategize our work. And I think in a way, the fact that I moved from being just the radiology management to being the head of innovation helped a little in the fact that I could also get involved more actively in what they do. And we're now in a more practical situation in that respect, partly at least because of that. And I think it really is a good lesson also for me as a radiologist in a way, because in the end, and that goes to the topic of our discussion of understanding the American market, just doing research is not going to build a business model, and it's not going to bring the money that the company needs. And in case, and if you are working with startup companies, at least after a while, you realize that you want them to get their goals as much as you want yourself to get your own goals. And you need to find ways to make them achieve their goals. And also in a way, having a practical solution that brings money, or at least saves money, or does something that is measurable, is also necessary for yourself to persuade whoever needs to pay for the services. So I think this roadmap that you need to have some kind of understanding of the market that you are intending your product for. And mostly in Israel, a lot of companies are doing it for the American market, and understanding how you're going to deliver a measurable value that can be pitched to whoever needs to be putting his hand in the pocket and paying for it is crucial. Yeah,
thank you. Thank you. As they say, time flies when you're having fun, and that goes for this session as well. But let me hook on to that point and ask a last question of Michal Meiri regarding timelines. One of the partners in Imagine Bio, Dan Stiebel, who I think is also on the line, likes to say that when it comes to scheduling, organizations, corporations, and organizations look at the agenda, look at the calendar, and startups look at their watch. They're on different timelines. And maybe Michal Meiri, that is, maybe you can address that issue of the mismatch and how do you manage that?
Well, maybe you can tell me because I still don't manage to handle that. But no, I think it's a major issue, and you just learn how to handle it and how to try and accelerate the different tasks. But when I try and build roadmap with my team, it's always a challenge because they always tell me, we can do it in like a few days, but what about them? We never know how long the IT processes would take and how long it would take them to close different legal agreements and so on. I think that's one of the reasons, and the key learning is that you always need to raise more money than you think you need. It's definitely otherwise a challenge. The processes are very long. And at the same time, I think you need, at least at the beginning, to find those early adapters that would be quicker and more agile and more used to working with startups. So it can either be large organizations with the innovation teams or the smaller ones that are just quicker.
Right. Okay. Thank you both. I'm so sorry that, again, that time is so short. I really appreciate you both being with us, and hopefully we can do it again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think it falls to me to introduce our partner, Mehdi Weiner, who's going to run the next case study. Mehdi is one of our partners at Imagine Bio, comes to us with a very rich background in the pharmaceutical industry as an executive in various roles, actually, at companies such as Novartis and Teva and Allergan. She has, again, a host of experience, and it's our pleasure to have her with us, both at Imagine Bio as well as tonight. Mehdi, please take it away.
Hi, good evening to everyone. I'd like to bring on board Dr. Mike Phillips from Intermountain Ventures and Josh Rubel from MD Clone. Josh, are you here? Hi, Josh.
Oh, look, he's wearing a coat. I don't think I've ever seen you in one of those. That's impressive.
I only dress up for my customers, Mike, so it's great to be here.
Yeah, we were actually discussing dress code before, but I don't know about Zoom dress code, so. Yeah.
No worries.
Anyway, it's really nice to have you here. Dr. Mike Phillips is a partner and a managing director of Intermountain Ventures, where he directs business development and venture investments for the Intermountain Venture Fund. Intermountain is a Utah-based not-for-profit system of 24 hospitals, 215 clinics, if I have it right, and around 2,500 employees. And the fund seeks to bring new technology and businesses to Intermountain from both internal and external sources. We're going to discuss that a bit later. Josh leads MD Clone's commercial organization, where he is responsible for sales, marketing, and customer success. That's a startup for you. You have 3 roles altogether for the North American market. MD Clone is a really fascinating Israeli technology company focused on empowering provider and life science organizations to improve care through a really unique way of dealing with healthcare data. And the Adams platform that I'm sure Josh is going to discuss later. The reason we're here is we want to discuss a really amazing case study where you have proven benefit from your collaboration that identified early kidney patients and enabled true saving lives, but also saving money through that collaboration and using your tool to analyze data. So I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your organization and what you were looking for in this match or in a match in general, and what happened later. But I'd love for you to also tell me a little bit about the challenges, not just the successes, which are very obvious. Please, Whoever wants to start is fine by me.
Yeah,
Mike?
I'll sort of lead off. Yeah. So yeah, Intermountain is about an $8 billion.
We can't hear you.
The system keeps auto muting me. I think they're sending me a message.
It happened again.
Yeah.
Yeah, for some reason it just wants to mute every time I'm doing it again. Does this have if you all have a suggestion on how to make that stop happening, I'm all ears. Regardless, Intermountain is has about 40,000 employees, $8 billion organization, very, very focused on public health. So about 65% of our patients are at full risk. So we're a value-based organization. I got a chance to meet MD Clone on a trip to Israel. Was introduced initially by the folks at Tri Ventures. When I was initially pitched this was much more of a research tool to be able to help people do their research projects. And I told them I had absolutely no interest in the research portion of this, that, we were a public health company and we were interested in helping patients. So the way our venture group works is that we are very active investors. We go out and find companies that we believe will help us perform better and help us take better care of our patients. And we build them into our system. And while we're piloting things, we build business models around those companies because we want to be able to go with them. And I've actually gone on sales calls with Josh to help promote the product in the market because we believe that is the best way to have the company grow, which means that it's going to continue to make great products for my health system. I'm an investor, so I want the company to have greater value, want them to have revenue because that just provides a multiple and does a better job for my investment fund. So we tend to be very active in that approach. So we pivoted them from research to actual clinical care, employed this in our group of patients who have chronic kidney disease, identified everyone in our system using the tool who has chronic kidney disease, put them on a care pathway. That has reduced the hospitalizations in that group by 90% by giving them active way for us to follow this kidney disease in this group of patients. We've also changed the number of people who go to home dialysis in our system from about 10% to 55% of our new patients going to home dialysis. In year one, all told, all of that's about 35 million in savings. For our healthcare system and a lot more healthy patients with kidney disease. And we've done probably another 20 or 30 other projects which are associated with that. And one of the tools, and I'll let Josh comment very quickly after this, is we found early on as a venture fund for us to be able to run effective pilots, we had to have a really clear scoping document up front. And that scoping document outlines the entire pilot, outlines the business case that we're trying to develop, make sure that we have clinical champions, and we make our clinical champions sign the scoping document, that they will be involved in the pilot and the trial, so that we have them really as active participants, and we have a clear set of business goals and clinical goals that we're going to get out of it that we can use to go with Josh and other folks in the company and help them pitch the company. And for us, it's a little strange as a not-for-profit to think of us doing that. One, it's for our investment piece, but even more importantly, we believe that if the product really works and it's helping patients, it's our obligation as physicians to get it out there in the market to help as many people as possible. So that's how we sort of jibe that concept of being a not-for-profit healthcare system with the concept of helping to promote companies. And equally as important in that we go out and help people, but the return that we get from any company like MD Clone when they perform really well, for us, that just goes back into our healthcare system to help us take care of more patients. So I'm going to stop talking now and let Josh get a word in.
I just wanted to mention it's a really unique position that you're both an investor and a partner in a way. So it sounds like that's a business model in itself.
Yeah, no, it is. It's our approach. We only invest in things that we use inside our health system. So, yeah, because, yeah, it's really sort of a way for us to double dip, honestly. We try and invest in things where it's going to help the bottom line of our health system. And for years, health systems did this and had vendor relationships and made companies much more valuable as a multiple of their revenue and never got anything back for doing it. And we believe that our patients deserve to get some of the benefit back that we've helped create in that company by giving them revenue and making their company grow. And so not only do they get the payment we pay them for the use of the product, but we should get some of that benefit back as patients, for our patients, in terms of making the company more valuable. So that's part of our business model.
Josh, how does it feel to have your technology change actually patient care? Because that's not what you intended originally, right?
Well, it's a funny thing. If you asked everyone on the line here, Mehdi, if the way their technology is playing out in the market was exactly as they envisioned it when it was in the idea stage, you probably wouldn't have a whole lot of people nodding their heads yes. So I think in this scenario, not only is the change welcome, it's unbelievably positive. And where Mike was going, and I think Becky and others on the line earlier that were discussing the kind of customer side or the provider or payer side of the equation, we're heading is that as payers and as providers, there's a unique opportunity for those organizations to act as laboratories. They are taking care of people there. They are covering people in those environments. Real business is taking place, real care is taking place, and they act as an environment where you can actually go and deploy these pilots and/or full enterprise level solutions like what MD Clone has done at Intermountain and impact patient care. And to the point earlier, also from many of the speakers, I think the theme that I'm walking away with, and I think it's true about our relationship with Intermountain, is success happens when there's a collision between the business opportunity and the care opportunity. So when the business model and the mission model come together, that's where you can have some success. And what Mike was describing a minute or two ago about CKD, I think is a wonderful example of that. And it's driven our growth at Intermountain. And that's the trick. The trick is finding where those collision points are and executing in partnership to make them a reality.
Okay. And what about the learnings from this collaboration? Because as you said, you both changed during that work together. And how did it affect you as an organization? Because you're not the same anymore.
Yeah, I think for us, what it did is it got people used to the idea that just getting the data to treat a patient was not the responsibility of a data analyst, but that our frontline caregivers could get that data. So in a typical situation, you would be asking for a request for data. You'd send it off to one of the data folks. 6 weeks later, they would come back with information for you about what you asked. And you realize the query wasn't quite right. And you adjust the query. And what ended up happening is the cycle time for information we needed to care for patients was 6 months. In this case, we're answering things in an afternoon. We set up our entire kidney program in 2 afternoon sessions with the folks from MD Clone. Now, the other part about that is that the data is not enough, and the technology is never enough. You have to be able to find a way to get that to the point of care so that it can affect patient workflow. And that's oftentimes where the big push is, and it's the stuff that we've learned how to do. And I would, from the MD Clone side, the best part of our relationship with them is that they listened to us, and they were really looking to help us do this. And we, from our part, recognized that we were never going to ask them for something that was just for Intermountain, because we wanted the business to be able to grow in other places. And for in many ways, very selfish reasons. A company that doesn't grow never has version 2.0 of a software.
Yeah, that's true.
In order for it to be a good piece of software that you're going to have and it's going to grow with you, there has to be a market. So you have to help them make a market, and that means not specializing it so much for you that it can't be sold anywhere else. And the other side of it too, obviously, if they don't sell it anywhere else, the company's not going to become more valuable. We're not going to make more money, So, and again, for us, we look at making money as patient care, because we're a not-for-profit healthcare system. all that money that we make is going to be put back into caring for patients.
Josh?
Yeah, it's so easy to follow Mike because he, the story is just right there in front of us for us all to take in. A couple of things we've learned in addition to what Mike was just describing. The first and maybe less important is we know that Delta flight schedules to Salt Lake City very well, but that speaks to a requirement associated with these kinds of partnerships. As Mike was describing, we were able to build out the CKD program in several afternoons. But it didn't remain static. It is a dynamic environment in the CKD service line at Intermountain, and we need to remain dynamic and wide open. And part of that is making sure that we're staffing the project the right way. You really need talent on both sides of the telephone or of the meeting table once flights start resuming. To not just kind of build out a project, build out a program, and then affect it, but to stay on top of it, to measure it, and to keep your eyes on the prize of the objective and or the KPI that you're going after. Staffing was critical. We are blessed with an unbelievable customer. Intermountain has great people on the ground, and then our project leads and the investment that we put in on our side, I think is I think on the front end we weren't exactly sure what that model was going to look like. I think we're still learning, but I think we've learned a bit on how to make sure the installation is successful. Has a lot to do with the people we throw at the project.
And did you have dedicated people at Intermountain that worked on the project, or was it?
We do.
So our ventures team has a dedicated piloting group that does this. Our goal is to get everything's launched, get the pilot going, and transfer it over to the clinical team as quickly as possible. Because at the end of the day, they have to live with it and use the tool in the long run. So our goal is to have a smooth transition into everyday use. So yes, we have a dedicated team, but we also, again, this scoping document that we start at the beginning of every project gets and makes sure that we have a clinical champion. And you have to have a clinical champion. It will just fail if you don't. Someone on the clinical team has to be a believer.
They have to see the value in it for them.
They have to see the value in it. And the hard part about this is that the clinical user never sees the economic value. The hospital system does, but the clinical user has to be delighted with the product, and they have to see something that they really like. So it's not necessarily going to be monetary for them, but you have to make them happy so that they will use it, and their use is what produces the endpoint value and the better care for patients. So it's a complicated mix of things that need to all go right in order to get something to successfully deliver.
Yeah, I think innovation has to be adopted internally, otherwise it doesn't work. So just one last question, because unfortunately we have to move on. What's ahead in the future? Like, are you planning more indications, more disease areas to work on? What's going to happen?
All right. Well, our goal is world domination. More directly, I say that a little bit tongue in cheek because one of the things that we've developed along with the folks at MD Clone is a global network to share data. And this is across 15 centers, both in the US and in Israel. It's a total of 65 million data sets. That data can be shared in synthetic format, and it allows us to understand very big questions in healthcare, and questions from all sides of the business, not just the clinical care, which is the first and foremost thing we're here to do, is take care of patients. But it also allows us to understand risk, and it allows us to provide data potentially to pharma for the design of new drugs. So a little joking on the world domination part, but it is becoming a worldwide project in which we're going to be able to share a tremendous amount of data, which we hope will help us take better care of our patients in the future. So
let's settle for world peace.
Yes,
yeah.
World peace. Yes. Well, that's Josh's second job.
Right. No, that just seems too easy. So it has to be a second job, Mike. Look, just responding after Mike, I think one of the things that's really interesting about working with Intermountain is they are a magnet for innovation and a place where the mission is informed by quality of care. And around the global network. I think what's next for us, and it's probably a 5 to 10 year journey here, is taking much of the value that can be derived from that quality mission at Intermountain and making it available outside of Utah and the Mountain West, around the world, and vice versa. Mike, I don't want to say anything bad about Intermountain. In fact, I have nothing bad to say, but I'll bet there's innovation that comes from elsewhere that may be useful in Utah.
We will learn from anyone who can help us take better care of patients.
Yeah. So that's
we
what's
have
next.
No pride about that. If someone gives us and someone can help us do a better job taking care of our patients, we're all ears.
I told you you're quite unique, Mike. No pride is very unique.
Well, we have plenty of pride. It's just we recognize that it's more important to take care of patients.
So thank you very much. I really appreciate the discussion. I'm sure there's much more to say. And I'd like to move back to Steve Collins from Matter, the CEO of Matter, for the next case study. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie.
Maddie, thanks so much. I am joined by two collaborators now for the last conversation of this program. I'm just going to take it 5 minutes past the bottom of the hour, just so we can have a good conversation with them. Sharon Markman is the director of the Center for Healthcare Delivery Science and Innovation at the University of Chicago Medicine. She launched the center about 5 years ago, and one of the many things that she does is help foster startup collaborations. University of Chicago Medicine, it's about a $2 billion academic medical center with facilities throughout the Chicago area. I'm also joined by Noam Kisem, who's the head of implementation and onboarding at TaylorMed, which is an Israeli company, and the company's software helps providers identify patients at financial risk and optimize revenue sources to help cover their healthcare costs. And most importantly, they recently signed a contract to work together. So Sharon, I'll start with you. What do you hope to accomplish by working with TaylorMed?
Well, first of all, thank you for including me. Most importantly, thank you for your delegations to Israel so that we get to learn from the experts in healthcare innovation. I was a participant in all 3 of your tours of Israel. We certainly hope to achieve a lot, not only from the financial impact of bringing in more revenue to the health system, which is always important, but we are an academic center serving the south side of Chicago in an underserved, under-resourced community where we're going to measure from a quality perspective what this tool can do to help our patients. We're going to look at, sorry, are things moving around on my screen? Ooh, sorry. So we're not only going to measure the financial impact, but the quality impact on our patients from a cost perspective, from a emotional perspective, from a patient satisfaction. Are patients going to adhere to their clinical recommendations because the impact of this tool might help them navigate in a better way? So we're really excited about this journey.
Noam, how did you get connected with the University of Chicago? And maybe brief. It's been a long process engaging with the University of Chicago, but just talk a little bit about what have been the key moments that have really helped advance the process that other entrepreneurs could learn from, that have really helped propel it forward, ultimately to the point of signing a contract.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thanks again for having me and inviting me to this. I know Surlik, my CEO, was hoping to be here, but I'm happy to kind of have the opportunity to be here instead of him. As far as the relationship with the University of Chicago, so I mean, it's been a long time coming. Sharon has been instrumental in kind of identifying the various stakeholders across the institution. I think what was kind of wound up being a benefit of this long relationship that we've developed is it gave Sharon an opportunity to bring in various stakeholders from the different groups. Ultimately, we kind of brought in the cancer service line, pharmacy, and many others. Now that we're starting the work, we realize that it's actually far more contributors, and I'm really excited to get started working with them. But on the other hand, it was also, I think, beneficial to have this long relationship, because as our company grew, as TaylorMed grew, we were able to kind of implement the system at other provider sites and basically come back to the table to University of Chicago Medicine with a greater understanding of what value statement would speak to these various stakeholders and fine tune what that statement would be. And I think that ultimately, in the past year or so, where I've been kind of more involved in the process, we were able to get to something that really speaks to the population that Sharon's talking about on the south side of Chicago.
Yes, Sharon, I just really quickly mentioned that a couple of people have mentioned the importance of a partnership in developing these relationships. And that's one thing that really struck me early on. And again, I met Srilik almost 3 years ago, was that he was very open to our ideas, very patient, willing to come and show to so many different stakeholders, because this product, TaylorMed, is not only just a pharmacy product to help financial toxicity for patients, so help reimburse for the pharmacy, but it also, we need to bring the social work team, the cancer team, the revenue cycle team, all with different priorities. We had to bring them all along. So it was really it's an amazing partnership. They've been incredibly patient and willing to participate over and over again with sharing their vision and hearing our perspective and being on our timeline, not necessarily, unfortunately, on their timeline.
That's such an important point. And somebody earlier had mentioned the differences in kind of how startups and how health systems kind of view the clock, essentially, or view the calendar, I guess, maybe more relevantly. So, Sharon, you talked about stakeholders and sort of the complexity. I think a lot of startups touch multiple parts of the system. You talk about what your role was in actually getting to a deal that can be signed, and then Noam, your perspective and what role you were playing in that same process of getting to signature.
Sure. So when I went to Israel the first time, I had just pivoted to University of Chicago from another academic health system where I spent 25 years in the cancer world. So I was very knowledgeable about cancer in other areas of the Chicago area, but not necessarily at University of Chicago. So the initial introduction was very enlightening to me and very exciting, and something I knew about. So when I returned back to the health system, it really was socializing the idea and learning more about our health system and our needs. And it took a lot of, as I said earlier, a lot of discussion with different teams of people. And that really is my role. In the Center for Healthcare Delivery, Science, and Innovation, I'm embedded in the hospital. I am not in the university. I am a research center in the hospital, looking to bring our academic partners in with hospital leaders and operations. So that's why we're going to be looking at, from a quality improvement and research lens, the product to see how it impacts our patients. But from the hospital side, the other side of my work is really how does it impact our workflows? How does it impact the financial impact of the pharmacy, and also our revenue cycle and our patient experience? We are, as we all know, health systems are measured more and more by our patient experience. And we're going to be using, one thing we had to pivot last summer actually was we realized the bandwidth of our staff wasn't able to use this tool. And we're fortunate enough that TaylorMed is now providing that service, which 3 years ago it wasn't. So we were, again, benefiting for the growth of TaylorMed. So we'll be using their people to develop this service for us. And we're going to be measuring the success and the impact on our patients and their willingness to participate with outside vendors to discuss this.
And echoing that, I think that the process to get to signature, really, it was very important for us to understand what spoke to each of these different stakeholders. So if we were talking to pharmacy, to talk about drug spend, if we're talking to cancer service line, to make sure that we have a patient-facing angle that we're able to resource correctly, et cetera. And if we're talking to innovation, of course, I mean, Sharon can speak for herself on what's interesting. But ultimately, and I think in the past year, especially with COVID and with kind of the changes in the environment, University of Chicago Medicine, regardless of COVID, we were able to put together basically a proposal that would enable us to not have to rely on University of Chicago staff. Why is that? Because our software is a SaaS platform. So at the end of the day, it's an application that individuals within the healthcare providers that are going to be using. But when University of Chicago came back and had a question about whether the resourcing was going to be an option, and it basically wasn't going to be one, then we put together what now has launched, which is TaylorMed Complete, which is a service offering where we basically use the system on the behalf of the provider in order to help realize that value.
And Noam, can you just dig a little deeper?
Sure.
What is the business model, and what's the, and then Sharon, I'll come back to you. But you had what is the business model?
So we're a SaaS application. Our business model is a pretty standard SaaS subscription-based model based on an annual contract in most cases. The application itself is used typically by the end users within the hospital, financial navigators, financial advocates, social workers, et cetera, who then use the system to identify financial opportunities that are available to patients to help offset some of the cost of care. And our main goal is, at the end of the day, we're a financial tool, but our goal is patient care. So for us, and speaking back to kind of the previous point, we want to make an impact for patients, but we believe that tying that into the success metrics that are the financial objectives of the institution is very, very important. And with University of Chicago, ultimately, kind of given the discussions that we were able to have, we were able to narrow down kind of what that value proposition is and those success metrics.
Sharon, you mentioned a few of the things that you would be looking at to measure success. Can you dig in a little bit more deeply? So, obviously you're paying something for use of the software. How important is the expectation that it's generating revenue? How important is the expectation that it's supporting patients? How do you balance that in your calculation of which solutions to invest your both time and resources to work with?
Right. So from a decision, our breaking point decision was purely a financial decision. That's what our revenue cycle team and that's what our pharmacy wanted to know. It's like, are we bringing in revenue? Are we losing opportunity? We have identified we are losing opportunity for additional revenue to the health system in the magnitude of millions of dollars, not hundreds of dollars, not thousands, but millions of dollars is an opportunity with using this tool to gain additional millions of dollars of revenue to the health system. So that was, the make or break point to signing the contract. From a quality improvement, from a patient experience, from a adherence to medical treatment, all of those, we now have a multidisciplinary team looking at how are we going to measure this product, not from the return on investment. The return on investment is the hospital operations side, and this is the healthcare delivery science side. Right now, financial toxicity is published on patients that are actually in the door. We have a lot of patients we know on the South Side that come to our door, are intimidated by the process, intimidated by the impact, the financial impact. We are not a socialized medicine, as we all know. The United States is not. And they walk away without even starting treatment. Can we measure that? Can we ask the questions to our patients when they first walk in the door? Are you concerned about the financial impact of this course of treatment? And then what can we do to offer that and help them with this? And that's where we can introduce TaylorMed. So we're going to be measuring on a lot of, so we have, as I mentioned, we have a multidisciplinary team that includes social workers, community health providers, oncologists, data scientists, all looking at what kind of survey are we going to provide to these patients as we start to navigate using TaylorMed. And our first blush, and we haven't really specifically defined what patients we're going to use the TaylorMed product with, but our first blush was only those patients that have a $5,000 or more outstanding balance with the health system. Those are the people that we think are going to have the biggest impact and hopefully adhere to treatment if they know that they're out of pocket, they're not going to be bankrupt for care. So we have, this is a process in place, and with the fortunate or unfortunately with COVID, we've had to put a little pause on actually rolling it out because our pharmacy team is a little bit busy with vaccinating the South Side of Chicago. So it's given us more time to really address and develop these surveys that we're going to and pull data and really try to define how we're going to be helping the patients.
That's great. I think that's one of the advantages of the tailor-made product is you can kind of adjust the aperture to capture the patient population that's most relevant to you. I'll ask each of you just quickly just one last question, or your take on one last question. You've both been through the process of trying to create relationships previously between health systems and a startup company. And this sometimes those processes break, and it doesn't, ultimately doesn't come through. And this was as you said, a 3-year, process. Partnership. That was a partnership.
Very patient partner. I know Israelis are not necessarily known for being incredibly patient. I would say TaylorMade has been incredibly patient with University of Chicago as we've navigated the starts and stops, the pivoting with transition of staff leadership, and now with COVID. Really it's been a slow process, but we got there. The contract is signed.
So what did you learn, Sharon? What was the key learning that you were able to apply from prior processes or whatever to keep this going? And then Noam, based on your experience, same question.
Like Israelis, I'm probably not the most patient person, but I've learned to be incredibly patient with the health system itself, because I several people have mentioned you need that one champion. And with a product like TaylorMade, we needed a lot of champions. We needed someone in pharmacy as a champion. And I got the senior VP on board pretty quickly. He was a pharmacy. Then I had to work on revenue cycle, but they had competing priorities. So they, sometimes would be interested, then they'd pull back for 6 months, and then they'd be back in. Our oncologists were very excited, but they again have competing priorities with their own either clinical research or other activities. Our social workers were very excited. So, it was a process of, because this tool crossed so many different silos, if you will, in an academic medical center, both from a quality and a research perspective, as well as an operations and workflow. Patience, and it took some time, but everyone is on board and excited. So that's really neat.
And I really can't agree enough with what Sharon said. Finding the right champions is critical, and especially when you're working with a larger provider, especially one like University of Chicago Medicine, who has a ton of different stakeholders, academics, who is not necessarily a stakeholder at all types of providers. The champions is very important. One of the lessons I think that I came out of this from a personal side is really identifying how to speak to these various stakeholders and make sure that their problems and their challenges are being heard. Because as you said, Stephen, the TaylorMade is very broad. The aperture is broad. And it almost sounds like I'm like magical thinking to say that we can solve every kind of challenge. The answer is we cannot solve every type of challenge, but we can solve a broad kind of swath of challenges. And echoing what Sharon said about silos, that's absolutely the case. It's a blessing and a curse to work for a company or with a company that's solving financial problems, solving patient problems, working with different diagnosis states, working with revenue cycle. So on the one hand, it opens up kind of who those champions can be. On the other hand, you need to kind of thread a needle, and patience is key.
Thank you both very much for your insights, and I can't wait to check in and see how the relationship is progressing now that you've reached the signature and as you go forward with implementation.
Thank you so much.
Ilya, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. It's so incredible to learn more about all these case studies. I think these are all folks that, on one hand, we knew a little bit about what they're doing from their PR, but hearing it in person and hearing how each of you has navigated all of these hiccups that we all try to get over and building up these relationships is amazing. So thank you for that. Now comes the fun part. We're unfortunately still virtual, but we are going to break out into breakout rooms. All the speakers tonight, both on the provider side as well as on the startups, are going to get their own breakout rooms, and then all the participants, you guys get to choose and try to mingle and introduce yourselves, please. You'll look at the very bottom of the Zoom menu, and you'll see breakout rooms options just in a moment as we activate them. And just please introduce yourselves, and as well as letting other people in the room introduce themselves as well. Thank you very much for that. We will post also our next event coming up next month, which is going to be focused on building collaborations with healthcare IT leaders. So thank you again, everybody, for joining tonight, and let's mingle.